Welcome to Athar's Garage. In this video, I'll be taking a deep dive into the Kyosho Fazer MK2 and opening it up, taking a look at the diffs, the motor, the shocks, and kind of just overall the condition of the car as it came from the factory. And then hopefully when I get access to the bearings, I'll set them aside to check them and clean them as well, to get the maximum performance I can out of this car for our spec racing class that we're starting. So let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take the wheels off. Now let's go ahead and cut this tag off. This tag is just a warning that the car comes in with the ESC set in Lipo mode. So if you want to run with nickel metal hydride, to go ahead and change the jumper out for that. So let's go ahead and take the motor out and see what the motor mount and pinion look like. I believe they're both made of plastic. All right, so those 6 screws held on the cover for the motor and spur gear. And I think all you gotta do is pull up on the motor and you can see the pinion. So the pinion is just press fit onto the shaft. And what's kind of nice about the motor mount is that it's labeled where to install the screws for a certain tooth pinion. So I think you got to refer to the manual because it doesn't give a number, it only gives letters. So and although they're bullet connectors, they're nicely sealed. That's nice to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this cover undone. So I'm going to place all the screws where they went so I don't lose anything. And then I'm going to go ahead and set this aside because I'm going to tear down into the rest of the car. Go ahead and take off this front cover. So those 8 screws out, this cover pops right off. I'm going to go ahead and put all the screws back where they came from so I don't lose anything. All right, so here we can see our steering servo with our linkage and servo saver. So I think I'm going to go ahead and leave that at the stock tightening position as of now, and then I'll go back and change it up if I feel like it's not, if it's flexing too much. So let's go ahead and take off the front shocks. It looks like there's 3 mounting positions at the bottom. Let's see if we can get that on camera. So it looks like there's 3 separate positions that we could use on the bottom, and then it looks like there's only 1 position on the top of the shock tower. This is definitely a much different level and quality of some of the other builds I've done, but I am actually extremely excited to run this because although it's you know, made from inexpensive components. It's an inexpensive car, but I think, you know, the scale body and hopefully the realism that it provides is just going to be an awesome experience running with some of the other guys. Let's get the rear shocks off. All right, so on the back, there's two positions you can put the shock in at the top, and there's two positions you can put it at the bottom, so you can kind of stand it up or lay it down. So it's interesting to see that there's a little bit more options in the rear than there are in the front. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and take these screws out from the rear hubs and see if we can get access to removing the axles, get access to the bearings that are in the hubs. So plastic axle, nothing special, doesn't seem to want to flex or anything, nice hard plastic. You can see that hex doesn't spin very freely, so there's a room for improvement there. Go ahead and do the other side. Same thing over here, the hex doesn't want to spin too freely. So let's go ahead and get these fake brake calipers off. If you take these calipers off, don't reinstall these screws because they can be too long and actually hit the little pieces inside. So there's actually a nylock nut that's inside. So when you screw your wheel screw in, it actually goes into that nylock nut. So that's kind of cool that it does that. And then the brake rotor just pops off, and you can just push out this little cup for the axle. I'm just gonna thread in that screw a little bit to pop it out, just like so. And out comes the bearing with it. I think there's only one bearing in the hub. Oh, there's actually two bearings. There's an inner and outer bearing. So we can get those out. And definitely tell they don't spin freely. So we'll definitely service these. They're probably filled with grease. So we'll definitely take the seals off of here, check, clean out the grease, and lube them up. So let's start putting the bearings away. And there's another bearing in here, so I'm gonna go ahead and push that out. They're the same size bearings, so it's good to know. You can tell that the hinge pin on the outside doesn't move super freely, so we'll definitely need to take a look at that. There's a set screw that holds that hinge pin in place, so you can back off that set screw and then push the hinge pin should be able to push the hinge pin out. So it looks like the hinge pin is pretty tight in the hub itself, and it moves freely in the arm. So, okay, so I got the set screw out. see if we can push the pin out. The pin is out. There's a slight undercut where that set screw probably installs. It's kind of cool that they did that. Interesting design. I'm going to go ahead and label this one since I know it's the right side, because there is a direction to these with the inserts that are in for the pin. Go ahead and reinstall the set screw so I don't lose it. And there we go. Let's go ahead and do the other side. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for the fronts. Before we complete the front, let's go ahead and remove this hub and get that pin out. So back to the front. The front's going to be a little bit more complicated because we do have the steering installed. It's cool how the front suspension is actually two balls instead of actually being a hinge pin. And that moves, has a lot of degrees of freedom. There's the axle. Probably don't need to take that off because I was gonna polish up that hinge pin, but because there's no hinge pin, don't need to worry about that. Push out the little axle cup. So put a screw in there and push that out. The front bearings are the same size as the rear bearings, so that's nice. Don't have to worry about getting them all mixed up. Everything else moves nice and smooth, so I probably won't take the inner hinge pins out for now, or the upper hinge pins. I think I'll leave them. So 2 O-rings came out of nowhere. Got to figure out where those go. The 2 O-rings that I just found go in the drive shaft cups. So take note of that. They're only in the front, I think. I don't see them in the rear. So now let's open up the differential housings and see what we got. So looks like everything is nicely greased. I'll go ahead and put the screws where they came off of. So everything, the gears themselves are nicely greased. So the pinion gear is nicely greased as well. Take off the center shaft. There's 2 bearings on there. Let me see. They are metal, they're metal shielded, so I won't be able to clean or lube those, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave those alone. So there's the front differential. Let's go ahead and get access to the rear. Looks like it might just be 2 screws in the rear at this point. Again, everything is nicely greased. I just gotta lift that out. Looks like there's 2 bearings on here as well. and they're both metal shielded, so nothing we can do about that. But I can set this aside. So I'm gonna set the chassis aside for now. And let's go ahead and open up these differentials, and I kind of want to get access to these bearings here. And I mean, they spin fairly well, but I think they're probably going to be filled with grease. So if we can clean them out, put some actual oil in there, get this thing to run a little smoother, a little cooler, and hopefully a little quicker. So grab a shop towel, try to wipe off as much of this grease as I can. So I'm expecting this to be full of grease per what I read online. I know they sell a different differential or a 4-bevel differential which has a seal, but I don't think this particular one has a seal. And if you try to fill it with silicone fluid, we're probably going to run it dry and eventually kill your gears. So, all right, let's see what we got. Yep, it's basically full of grease. It's only a 2-bevel gear. I probably won't get access to these bearings because I actually do not have any grease like this, Kyosho specific grease that will go in here. So I'll probably just wait until I get that, and I'll come back and I'll service these bearings. But as you can see, there's actually no gasket on here, so I probably won't try to run silicone oil in here. I'll just use the grease and see how that works out. I know Kyosho makes different weight or different thickness grease for the differentials, so you can always tune with that. You know what? Go ahead and leave that open for now, so I can take a picture of everything and post it on our Facebook page for our local hobby shop, in case anybody's interested in seeing what it looks like underneath. It looks like the gear here is stuck to the grease. You can see this side is also filled nicely with grease, so no worries there. So everything's pretty much disassembled. I don't have the grease to replace this. That's already in there. So I'm gonna go ahead and go clean these bearings, and then I'll be right back. I took all the seals off the bearings, and they are definitely filled with grease. So see if you can see. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean these out with brake cleaner and then oil them up. So I'll be right back. All right, so the bearings are all cleaned, and I can now oil them and reassemble the car. So definitely recommend doing this on any of your bearings, whether it's a race kit or an RTR, because most of the time the bearings that are included, even high-end bearings, are usually going to be filled with grease. Since these are somewhat large bearings, I'm going to put 2 drops. Go ahead and install these in the rear hubs, on the drive cups. So everything feels nice and smooth. Put this thing back together and we can go take it for a rip. So let's put our differential back together. You want to tighten in a crisscross pattern so you can make sure it seats evenly. Let's go ahead and do the front. Take some of this excess grease and just apply it on to the gears. Doesn't need a lot. There's probably enough already on there, and it'll eventually work its way back on there. If there's too much, it's just going to fling it, and then it'll probably get messy if it starts to leak out. So, and then on the front, the differential installs like so, and on the rear, the differential gear actually sits on the other side. And then in the front, I'm going to go ahead and install the drive gear, and there's going to be slight spacing between the two bearings, just like so. And let's go ahead and install the rear gear as well. And take note where the bearings install. The bearings can install here and here. There we go. Now we can go ahead and install the front and rear covers. So on the rear, we're only going to install the 2 screws back here, because the screws that go in the front are on a different cover. Go ahead and remove the motor and just make sure everything is moving nice and free, which it is. That's exactly what we want. Let's go ahead and install the center drive shaft. So I want to make sure, there we go. Let's go ahead and install the front cover. There's 4 screws that install here. The 4 screws that install on the front are located here. Okay, just making sure everything moves nice and smooth. So let's go ahead and continue with the front and install the drive cups. So just push those in and make sure the bearing that's in the hub doesn't pop out. So now we want to install the O-rings in the drive cup on the inside. It might be the easiest thing is to just kind of throw it in there in this angle and then install your axle. Now line up your screw with the ball in the hub and tighten it down. And you don't want to over tighten it, so just kind of snug it up and then maybe back off like 1/8 of a turn, and make sure everything moves nice and smooth. Let's go ahead and do this side and go ahead and install that O-ring in there. That O-ring is just there to make sure the axle doesn't rattle around. And I think it might help prevent it from popping out. Seems a little stiff. I think it might be because of that O-ring. I'm gonna run it like this for a little bit, see if it smooths out. If it doesn't, I'm gonna go ahead and remove it to see if it helps with the handling. All right, let's go ahead and install the brake caliper / hex. Just push that on and then go ahead and install, oh, not the brake caliper, the brake rotor. And now you can go ahead and install your fake brake caliper. Let's go ahead and do the other side. Let's go ahead and install this front cover. Move on to the rear. So let's go ahead and install the axle cups into the hubs. And let's go ahead and install the right hand side first, since I have it in my hands. And before you do that, I'm going to go ahead and polish these pins up, see if I can get them to rotate a bit smoother. I would typically use a drill, but I think these are a little too small to check up on. So I'm just gonna try to polish by hand using some Never Dull. Wipe it with a microfiber towel. Make sure there's no fibers or anything on there. So I'm gonna go ahead and back out the set screw all the way. Then I'll go ahead and insert the hinge pin. And then I'll go ahead and install the set screw. And let's go ahead and install our axle. And then finally our camber link. And don't tighten it too much, just kind of snug it up and then take it back like 1/8 of a turn, so it moves nice and free. And go ahead and install our wheel hex / brake rotor, and then follow up by installing the brake caliper. Everything moves nice and free. There's no binding. Let's move on to this side. All right, so I decided not to open up the shocks in case I lose any fluid, because all it says in the manual is Kyosho number 100 fluid that's in there. And I don't know if that 100 means 100 CST. So something I do not have on me. The lowest I have is 30 weight, which I don't know if it's going to be too thick for these, if I need to refill them. So I'm going to go ahead and leave them alone for now, drive with them as they are, and then change if necessary with what I have on hand. So let's go ahead and reinstall these. go ahead and move on to the rears. Kind of like how the shocks mount in the rear, just because it'd be easier to access. There's nothing behind the rear shock tower, so the motor just drops in like so, and we can install the last piece, which is this rear cover. So that's basically how to disassemble and reassemble the Kyosho Fazer MK2. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if you did. If you want more content about this vehicle, if you have any questions on how to do something specific, please let me know down in the comments. I'm happy to show you how to do it. Thank you once again, and I'll see you all in the next one.